They said no wild animal would ever come that close to a human. They said leopards were killers, silent, untouchable, too smart to ever beg. But they hadn't met her. It was just after midnight when the scratching began. Slow, heavy, desperate. Combat medic Rowan Briggs was alone in her jungle outpost, half asleep, half alert, when she heard it. Something dragging itself across the dirt. Something big. She opened the reinforced steel door and froze. A leopard. Not attacking. Not snarling. Bleeding. Limping. Pregnant. And staring straight into her eyes, like it had come here on purpose. Then it collapsed at her feet. Unconscious. Dying. Rowan didn't call for help. She didn't raise her weapon. She just knelt down and whispered, "I've got you." What happened in that cabin over the next 24 hours would leave even seasoned soldiers speechless, because that leopard didn't come alone. And what she gave birth to would change everything. Hi, my amazing friends and family. Welcome back to another story for today. If you are ready to enjoy this heartwarming story, smash the subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. I love seeing all your names and places. Also, don't forget to check out more of our interesting videos on the channel. Now back to the story. The jungle didn't knock. It growled. It hissed. It howled through the trees and whispered death between the leaves. But it did not knock. Until that night. Rowan Briggs had been stationed at the Njila outpost for 6 weeks. A former army field medic with more tour scars than she ever talked about. She thought she'd seen it all. Landmines. Burned children. Eyes that stopped blinking mid-sentence. But nothing prepared her for the sound that came just past midnight. First she thought it was wind. Then she thought it was rain. Then she heard it again. Slower now, heavier. Like something being dragged across gravel. Came from behind the cabin. Right outside the back door. She grabbed her flashlight and sidearm. The jungle was pitch black beyond the rusted screen door. A blanket of humidity pressed against the windows like breath. The generator had cut off earlier, so everything inside was running on backup battery. Not that it mattered. The jungle didn't run on electricity. It ran on instinct. Rowan unlatched the door, opened it slowly, and blinked hard. There, barely 3 feet away, something enormous swayed in place. She raised her flashlight. Eyes, not human, not bear, not anything she could categorize. They glowed amber in the beam, wide, pained, and very, very alive. A leopard, and not just any leopard. Pregnant one. She could see the bulge even through the shadows. The rise of ribs and the trembling of fur. Blood matted the leopard's side. A long, wet trail behind it showed how far it had crawled. Her first instinct should have been to run. Her second should have been to shoot. But she didn't move. The leopard took 1 step forward, then fell. Hard. His head hit the dirt. Limbs collapsed. It let out a low, rattling breath. Then silence. Rowan stood frozen in the doorway, gun lowered, flashlight trembling in her grip. She had seen wounded soldiers die quieter than that. Her heart kicked hard in her chest. This had to be some kind of trap. A sick jungle test she'd never read about. But there was no one else out here. No camera crews. No tourists. Just the medic, the night, and a dying predator that should have ripped her throat out, but hadn't. She moved. Slowly. Stepped outside. Boots sinking into damp dirt. She crouched next to the body. It was still breathing. Barely. There were 2 wounds, one clean like a slash or deep cut. The other, higher up, was swollen and jagged. A snare injury, maybe. Or barbed wire. Infection had already set in. The leopard's fur was caked with mud and pus. Its paws were cracked and bleeding. And its belly was moving. Rowan looked up at the jungle around her. Every instinct screamed, "Get inside." But one louder voice, the one she'd followed across battlefields, whispered something else. Help her. She didn't know why the leopard came, or how it made it through the wilds like that. But she knew why it stopped here, because it had no other place left. And it wasn't just fighting for itself anymore. Rowan dropped her weapon. She wrapped her hands around the leopard's front legs and dragged it into the cabin. The body was heavier than it looked, all muscle and bone. She nearly fell twice but kept going. Blood streaked behind her like red ink on the concrete floor. She shut the door behind them, bolted it, and whispered softly, "I've got you, girl. You're safe now." She had no cage, no tranquilizers, no gloves thick enough to stop a bite. Just a field kit, some gauze, and a set of hands that had once restarted a boy's heart in the middle of a minefield. It would have to do. She laid the leopard on a wool blanket near the heater vent. The power flickered once, then steadied. She cleaned the wounds gently, whispering every step. The cat didn't move, didn't growl, didn't twitch. Rowan stitched the tear along its thigh using a curved needle and shaky hands. She'd never operated on a big cat before. But muscles were muscles. Blood was blood. And pain looked the same in every species. She was halfway through the second stitch when the leopard's body jerked violently. A growl bubbled from its throat. Its eyes opened. Rowan froze. For a full 10 seconds, woman and beast stared at each other. The leopard's golden eyes locked onto hers. Wild, unreadable, but not panicked. Then the growl faded, and the contractions began. Fast, hard. The leopard's entire body tensed, claws raking the floor. Rowan dropped the needle, shoved her kit aside, and knelt by the hind legs. She knew labor, had delivered in helicopters in collapsed buildings, in tents soaked with blood. But never like this. The first cub crowned at 3:47 a.m. Small, slick, unmoving. Rowan cleared the airway with a dropper. Rubbed the tiny body hard between a cloth. Nothing. She tried again. Then a cough. A squeak. Then movement. Rowan gasped. She turned toward the mother leopard. But the big cat was barely conscious. Her head lolled, breathing shallow. A second contraction hit. Another cub. This one moved on its own, blindly crawling across the blanket. Rowan pulled it close to its mother's belly, guided it to nurse. She glanced at the clock. For 12 a.m. A third cub came. Silent. Too silent. Rowan's hands moved faster than her thoughts. She checked the airways. Nothing. Pressed 2 fingers against the ribs. Faint flutter. She started compressions. 15 tiny pushes. 2 soft breaths. Come on. Again. Come on. A twitch. A whimper. It lived. Rowan collapsed back on her heels, eyes burning, chest thudding like a drum. Her entire body was soaked with sweat. Blood coated her sleeves. The cabin smelled like fur and iron and something primal. She looked down at the 3 cubs, then at their mother. The leopard was watching her again. Eyes calm now, breathing steady. And then, the strangest thing, she blinked, slowly, almost like a nod. Rowan whispered, "You're welcome." The storm outside began to lift, but the night inside the cabin had only just begun. Because as Rowan stood to wash her hands, she felt it. Presence. Something outside. She turned to the window, pressed her palm against the glass, and froze. In the tree-line, just beyond the glow of the flood lamp, stood a shape, tall, still, and staring back. Another leopard. Watching. Waiting. Rowan did not move. She stood at the window, palm still pressed flat against the glass, breath slow and measured, as if the wrong sound might tear the night open. Outside, the jungle had shifted. The insects had gone quiet. The frogs stopped croaking. Even the wind felt like it was holding back. The shape in the tree-line did not move either. It stood just beyond the floodlamp's reach, a darker shadow inside the darkness. Rowan could not see spots or eyes clearly, but she did not need to. She knew what it was. Another leopard, watching the cabin, watching her. She lowered her hand from the glass and turned slowly toward the room behind her. The cabin was a mess now. Blood streaked the concrete floor. Used gauze lay in small piles. Her field kit was open and scattered like it had been dumped in a hurry. And at the center of it all, on the wool blanket near the heater vent, the leopard lay breathing steadily, her flank rising and falling in a rhythm that had only just stabilized. 3 tiny cubs were pressed against her belly. Alive. Rowan swallowed hard. Her training told her exactly what she should do next. Call for backup. Report the incident. Secure the area. put distance between herself and a wild predator that could wake at any moment and tear her apart. Another part of her training said something else. If an animal is suffering beyond recovery, you end it clean. Fast. No hesitation. But the leopard was not dying anymore. And Rowan was not looking at an animal that wanted to kill her. She was looking at a mother who had crossed miles of jungle, bleeding and pregnant, to collapse at her door instead of anywhere else. That did not happen by accident. She moved quietly back toward the blanket. Each step felt loud in the silence. Her boots stuck slightly to the floor where blood had dried. She knelt beside the leopard and studied her wounds again. The stitching was holding. The swelling had not worsened. The infection was ugly but manageable. She had cleaned it as best she could with saline and antibiotics meant for humans. It would have to work. Rowan checked the cat's gums carefully. Pale but improving. Then the leopard's eyes opened. Not wide. Not startled. Just open. Rowan froze again. The leopard did not growl. Did not bare her teeth. Her golden eyes focused slowly, like a camera lens adjusting. She lifted her head just an inch, enough to see Rowan clearly. They stared at each other. Rowan's heart beat so hard she felt it in her throat. "I'm not hurting you," she whispered. The leopard's ears flicked once. She lowered her head again with a slow exhale and rested her chin on the blanket. One of the cubs squeaked softly and pressed closer to her belly. Rowan released a breath she had been holding for far too long. She stood and moved back to the door, sliding the bolt into place with care. The metal click echoed louder than it should have. She did not look out the window again. Whatever was out there would stay out there. For now. She checked the radio mounted near the counter. Static. She adjusted the antenna. Changed frequency. Tried again. Nothing. The jungle swallowed signals as easily as it swallowed people. Rowan leaned her forehead briefly against the wall. This was it. No backup. No orders. Just her oath. She had sworn it years ago, standing under a blazing sun in a pressed uniform that no longer fit the person she had become. I will preserve life. She had not specified whose. She washed her hands in the sink, the water running red, then clear. Her fingers trembled now that the adrenaline was fading. She dried them on her pants and returned to the leopard. That was when the body tensed. The leopard's back arched. Her breathing changed. Shorter. Sharper. Rowan recognized it instantly. "No," she whispered. "You're not done yet." Another contraction rippled through the cat's body. The cub squirmed and squealed, startled by the sudden movement. The leopard let out a low sound that was not a growl, not a hiss, but something deeper. Pain, fear, instinct. Rowan dropped to her knees again. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, I'm here." The next contraction came faster, stronger. Rowan grabbed clean cloths, more gloves, anything she could reach. She positioned herself carefully, staying clear of claws and teeth. The leopard shifted, muscles trembling, tail flicking against the floor. The fourth cub crowned slowly. Too slowly. Rowan's jaw clenched. She guided gently, murmuring without thinking, words meant for women in labor, words meant for frightened boys on operating tables, words meant for anyone hanging on by a thread. "That's it. Easy. You're doing great." The cub slid free into her hands. It did not move. Rowan's chest tightened. She cleared the airway, rubbed the tiny body briskly, checked the mouth. Nothing. The leopard lifted her head suddenly and growled. Not at Rowan, at the cub. A warning sound. A demand. Rowan worked faster. She pressed 2 fingers gently against the chest. Tiny compressions. Counted under her breath. 1, 2, 3. The cub twitched. Rowan sucked in air and kept going. A weak breath followed. Then another. The cub let out a thin cry. Rowan laughed and cried at the same time, the sound breaking loose before she could stop it. She placed the cub beside its siblings, guiding it toward warmth. The leopard sniffed it immediately, then licked it with slow, deliberate strokes. The room seemed to breathe again. Rowan sat back on her heels, sweat dripping down her spine, muscles shaking from exhaustion. She had not realized how much time had passed. Her watch read 5:38 a.m. Dawn was coming. Outside, the jungle stirred faintly. Insects began to hum again. Birds tested the air with soft calls. Life resumed its rhythm as if nothing extraordinary had happened inside a medic's cabin in the middle of nowhere. Rowan leaned against the wall and slid down to sit on the floor. That was when the doubt hit her. What had she done? Helping a leopard was one thing. Sheltering her and her cubs was another. But the presence outside the cabin meant the situation was far from contained. She thought about the shape in the trees. The watcher. If it was a male, he might try to claim the cubs. Or kill them. Or kill her. If it was a rival, it could bring others. She had turned her cabin into a den. She closed her eyes briefly. Her mind flashed through every regulation she had ever memorized. Every wildlife protocol. Every warning. And then another memory pushed its way in. A little girl, no older than 7, crying silently on a cot while Rowan stitched her arm after shrapnel tore through a village wall. The child had not spoken, had not screamed, just stared at Rowan with the same eyes. Eyes that asked for help without words. Rowan opened her eyes. The leopard was watching her again. Not as a threat, as a presence. Rowan pushed herself up and moved slowly to the counter, grabbing more water, more clean cloths. She worked quietly, efficiently, checking the cubs one by one, counting breaths, making sure none were fading. She wrapped fresh bandages around the leopard's side, reinforcing the stitches. The cat flinched but did not strike. Rowan spoke softly the entire time, a low hum of reassurance. "I won't leave you," she said. "Not now." Hours passed like that. Sunlight crept in through the high window, cutting through dust and steam. The cabin warmed. The heater clicked off automatically. Rowan finally allowed herself to sit again. That was when she heard it. A sound outside. Not a footstep. Not a growl. A scrape. Slow. Deliberate. She stood and approached the window once more. This time there were 2 shapes. Then 3. Leopards. Standing just beyond the light. Not pacing. Not attacking. Waiting. The mother leopard stirred and lifted her head. She looked toward the window. Her ears angled forward. She let out a low call. Not loud. Not threatening. The shapes outside shifted. One stepped back. Another disappeared into the brush. The jungle accepted the message. Rowan backed away from the window. Her heart hammered. She had crossed a line tonight. A line no rulebook covered. A line written in blood and instinct and choice. She sat beside the blanket again and watched the cubs nurse. "I guess this is happening," she murmured. The leopard closed her eyes. And slept. The leopard slept. Not the deep sleep of comfort, but the guarded stillness of something that had given everything it had left. Her sides rose and fell in slow, heavy waves. The cubs were pressed tight against her belly, 3 small bodies marked with dark spots that looked almost painted on. They made soft sounds when they breathed, tiny whistles that barely carried across the room. Rowan sat on the floor with her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on them. She had not moved in a long time. The sun had risen enough now to cast thin stripes of light across the cabin floor. Dust motes drifted lazily in the beams. Outside, the jungle had begun to wake, but it was a cautious waking. Birds tested the air with short calls and then stopped. Insects buzzed and then went quiet again. Something was wrong. Rowan felt it before she heard anything. The silence was too neat. The jungle was never neat. She stood slowly, joints stiff, and moved closer to the window. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. She looked older than she had yesterday. Her hair was plastered to her temples with sweat. Her uniform was streaked with blood that was not hers. She leaned forward just enough to peer outside. Nothing moved. No shapes. No shadows. No eyes. But the feeling remained. Behind her, one of the cubs let out a faint, thin sound that made Rowan's heart jump. She spun around and dropped to her knees beside the blanket. The smallest cub was struggling. Its chest barely moved. Its mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Its spots were faint, almost gray, as if the life inside it had not decided whether to stay. Rowan did not hesitate. She grabbed her field kit with hands that were steady now. Calm settled over her like a familiar coat. This was where she lived. In moments like this, when thinking was a luxury and action was everything. She checked the airway gently with a gloved finger. Clear. She tilted the cub slightly and watched its chest. Too slow. She reached for the tweezers. These had once been used to pull metal from human flesh. Shrapnel. Bone fragments. Splinters from doors blown apart. Now they hovered over something no bigger than her palm. "I've got you," she whispered. She cleared the mouth carefully, then rubbed the cub's back briskly with a clean cloth, stimulating breathing. The cub twitched once. Then again. Rowan counted softly under her breath. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. Her jaw tightened. She placed 2 fingers over the tiny ribs and began compressions. Gentle. Precise. She had learned this rhythm years ago, taught by an old medic who had said, "Life listens when you talk to it right." Rowan talked now. "Stay," she murmured. "Stay here." The cub's body jerked. A weak breath followed. Then another. A sound escaped its throat. Thin. Fragile. But alive. Rowan let out a shaky breath and pulled the cub closer to warmth, placing it against its siblings. That was when the mother leopard woke. It happened in a blink. Her head snapped up. Her eyes locked onto Rowan's hands. A sound ripped from her chest that froze the air in the cabin. A snarl. Low. Rattling. Dangerous. Rowan did not move. Every muscle in her body screamed to back away, to stand, to create distance. But she stayed exactly where she was, hands still cupped around the cub, body low and non-threatening. "It's okay," she said quietly. "I'm not taking them." The leopard's lips curled, showing teeth that caught the light like knives. Her tail lashed once against the floor. Rowan swallowed. She slowly slid the cub back toward the leopard's belly and removed her hands. The leopard leaned forward, sniffed the cub intensely, then licked it with quick, firm strokes. The snarl faded into a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. Rowan released the breath she had been holding. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the leopard lowered her head and rested her chin against the blanket, eyes still open, watching Rowan with sharp focus. Not attacking, not forgiving, assessing. Rowan leaned back on her heels. "Thank you," she whispered, though she did not know if the animal understood the words or only the tone. She glanced at the cubs again and counted. 3. Only 3. Her stomach tightened. She looked toward the corner of the cabin where a smaller blanket lay folded. She had placed something there hours ago and tried not to think about it. The 4th cub had never breathed. It had slipped into her hands quietly, too quiet, its body already cold in a way she recognized instantly. Rowan had tried anyway. She always tried. But life had already moved on. She had wrapped the tiny body gently and set it aside, away from the others. Rowan felt the weight of that loss now like a stone pressing against her chest. She stood and crossed the room slowly, picking up the small bundle. She hesitated only a second before kneeling again beside the leopard. The mother's eyes followed the movement. Rowan placed the wrapped cub near her but not touching the living ones. She watched closely, heart pounding. The leopard leaned forward, sniffed the bundle, let out a soft sound that barely registered as a noise. She did not touch it. She turned her head away. Rowan bowed her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The cabin felt heavy with something unspoken. Grief, understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that survival did not mean everyone made it. Outside, a bird screamed once and then fell silent. Rowan's head snapped up. The jungle had gone quiet again. Not the gentle pause of dawn, the sharp stillness of attention. She moved to the window slowly, careful not to draw sudden motion. Her eyes scanned the tree line. Still nothing. But she could feel it now clearly. Something was close, very close. A branch cracked softly somewhere beyond the clearing. Then another. Rowan backed away from the window. She turned just in time to see the leopard rise. Slowly, carefully, painfully. The big cat stood over her cubs, muscles tense, ears forward. Her body language had shifted completely. This was not the posture of an injured animal. This was a warning. Rowan felt the hair on her arms rise. "What is it?" she whispered. The leopard did not look at her. Her gaze was fixed on the door. Rowan followed it. The handle rattled. Once, then again. Not from wind, from pressure. Something brushed against the wood from the outside. Rowan's breath hitched. The leopard let out a low, deep call that vibrated in Rowan's chest. It was not loud. It did not threaten. Commanded. The pressure on the door stopped. Rowan held her breath. Seconds passed. Then a sound drifted in through the thin walls. A deep, rasping chuff. Answering. Another leopard. Close. Rowan's mind raced. If there was one, there could be more. A dominant male. A rival. A protector. She had no way of knowing which. The mother leopard stepped forward, placing herself between the cubs and the door. She glanced back at Rowan once, eyes bright and steady. Rowan understood. "Stay back." She did. The cabin seemed to shrink around them as the jungle pressed in. Rowan could hear breathing outside now. Slow. Controlled. Not frantic. Not curious. Measured. The mother leopard lifted her head and called again. Sharper this time. The sound outside shifted. Moved. Rowan dared to peer through the small side window. She saw spots. A powerful shape pacing just beyond the light. A long tail flicking. Muscles rolling under skin. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The shape retreated. The pressure lifted. The jungle exhaled. Rowan sagged against the wall, legs trembling. The mother leopard turned back to her cubs and lowered herself carefully beside them. She licked each one in turn, then curled around them protectively. She looked at Rowan again. This time, her eyes were softer. Rowan wiped her face with the back of her sleeve and laughed quietly, the sound shaky and disbelieving. "You really picked the right night," she murmured. She cleaned the cabin as best she could, moving quietly, efficiently. Blood was wiped away. Used dressings were bagged. The small bundle in the corner remained untouched for now. She prepared a shallow box lined with cloth and placed it near the door. Later, when it was safe, she would return the cub to the earth. That was how it should be. She returned to her spot beside the leopard and sat with her back against the wall, keeping watch. Hours passed. The cubs nursed and slept. The leopard dozed lightly, waking at every sound. Rowan's eyes burned with exhaustion, but she refused to sleep. Every now and then, she felt movement outside, a presence circling, always just out of sight. By late morning, the heat crept in. Sweat dampened her shirt again. The jungle sounds slowly returned, but they felt muted, restrained. Rowan knew then that the cabin was no longer neutral ground. It had been claimed. Not by her. By them. She reached into her pocket and touched the edge of her radio again. More out of habit than hope. Still nothing. She looked at the leopard and her cubs. At the door. At the jungle beyond. A medic had sworn to preserve life. She had done that. Now she would have to survive it. The leopard was still breathing heavily when Rowan stood up from the blood-slick floor, hands trembling, covered in the scent of afterbirth and antiseptic. The cabin felt smaller now, packed with the presence of 3 barely moving cubs and a mother that could rip her throat out in less than a heartbeat. But the mother didn't. She simply lay there, panting, golden eyes tracking Rowan's every move. Not with fear, not with hate, with something older, something deeper. Trust. Rowan backed away slowly, giving the feline her space. Her knees buckled near the doorway, and she slid down the wall, exhaling like she'd just outrun a war. Then the silence hit. Not the kind of silence that's peaceful, but the kind that warns you you're not alone. All the jungle night sounds, the frogs, the insects, the distant screeches of monkeys had stopped, gone quiet in one single breath. Even the wind felt like it was holding still. Rowan froze, hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm on her thigh, though she knew full well it would do nothing against what was out there. A movement flickered across the window. Then another. Shadows. Big ones. She crawled over, slow and quiet, just enough to peek out. What she saw turned her blood into ice. Eyes, dozens of them, low to the ground. Yellow, green, silver reflections blinking in and out between tree trunks and thick brush. Leopards. Not just one or two. A whole circle of them. Big, sleek, muscled beasts. Far larger than the mother she'd helped. They moved with eerie coordination. Silent paws barely bending leaves as they prowled just outside the cabin's range of light. But they weren't attacking. Not yet. They were waiting. Watching. Rowan's breath hitched. The cabin, fortified with military-grade materials, could handle small arms fire. Could survive storms. Maybe even a bear. But it wasn't built to withstand a coordinated strike from the apex predators of the Congo Basin. She reached back for her emergency flare gun, careful not to make noise. Inside, the mother leopard shifted. Her body trembled, but her head rose. She sniffed the air once, twice. Then, with a voice so low it rumbled the floorboards, she growled. Not at Rowan. At the forest. One long, guttural note that curled out into the trees like smoke. Rowan watched, heart pounding, as the jungle paused. And then, something massive stepped forward from the dark. A male, twice the mother's size. His coat was darker, almost black. His face older, scarred, with one torn ear and eyes like coals dipped in moonlight. He didn't growl. He just stood there, in full view now, his breath rising in pale clouds. Then he looked toward the cabin, toward the mother, then toward Rowan. Rowan didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. The mother leopard gave another growl, shorter this time, sharper. Command. And the male responded. Not with sound, but by turning away. One slow step, then another. And just like that, the rest followed. All of them. Silent shadows melting back into the trees as if they'd never been there. No threat. No blood. No warning. Just a clear message. You've been watched. Rowan sank to her knees again, staring out into the dark. Whatever she'd done, whatever line she'd crossed by helping that mother, she'd been marked. Not as prey. Not anymore. As something else. Something rare. Respected. Behind her, the mother leopard shifted closer to her cubs. One mewed softly. The mother's tongue swept over its head. And then, finally, Rowan let herself cry. But not out of fear. Out of awe. Because tonight, she hadn't just delivered life. She'd been pulled into something ancient. Something sacred. And the jungle had seen it all. Morning crept in slow, like the jungle didn't quite trust the light. Rowan hadn't slept. She couldn't. Not after what she'd seen outside those windows. Not after the jungle stared back at her and decided she was allowed to live. The mother leopard was asleep now, curled around her cubs like a living wall. Two of the little ones suckled blindly, the third, the smallest, just nestled in for warmth. Rowan eased herself up from the floor. Her knees cracked. Her uniform shirt was stiff with blood and fur and stress sweat. She stepped to the cabin's narrow front porch. The light was gray, thin, and the air, still too quiet. Rowan squinted into the trees. First, nothing seemed off. Then she spotted it. A shape in the dirt. Too straight, too clean. Her stomach dropped. A boot print. Fresh. Pressed deep in the mud just beyond the clearing. Exactly where the big male leopard had stood the night before. Rowan crouched low and ran her fingers along the edge of the print. Deep heel. Military tread. The kind only worn by tactical boots or hunters too serious for rubber soles. Then she saw another. And another. Leading into the trees. She followed slowly, keeping one hand on her sidearm, the other brushing back vines. That's when her foot struck something. Metal. She looked down. A shotgun shell. Bright red. Still warm to the touch. She knelt. More shells. 2, 3. All scattered in a tight radius near a broken log. And that wasn't all. She found a half-smoked cigarette. A matchbook. A torn square of plastic wrap that once held jerky or some other field ration. All signs pointed to one thing. Someone was out here. And they were watching. Not just her, but the leopards. Rowan's pulse started to hammer. She pulled out her field radio and pressed the call button. Echo 9, this is Briggs, she whispered. I need immediate recon request. Possible poacher activity near outpost Delta 4. I repeat. Crack. Static. She stepped back, adjusted the antenna, and tried again. Nothing. Dead air. The signal was being blocked or worse, jammed. She turned around, every nerve burning. The jungle behind her felt wrong. Not just empty, but observed. She didn't run. She walked. Fast. Controlled. Quiet. Back at the cabin, the air felt heavier. She stepped inside. The mother leopard was awake now, sitting up, eyes locked on her. Not aggressive, not fearful, but knowing. Rowan shut the door gently, leaning her back against it. We're not alone, she whispered. The leopard didn't move, but one ear twitched. The cubs squeaked and wriggled beside her belly. Rowan sighed and crossed the room. She checked the satellite box again. Still no signal. She opened her logbook and wrote down everything she'd found. Boot prints, shells, radio silence. The page felt like a confession. She looked up again. The leopard was watching the window, and for the first time, she wasn't beside her cubs. She moved toward the door, stood still, sniffed. Then, without a sound, she slipped through the narrow gap Rowan opened for her. Into the wild, into the dark, gone. Rowan stood alone in the cabin now, her breath caught in her throat. The cubs whimpered once, then quieted. Rowan moved to them, laid her hand gently across their backs. One of them licked her wrist, clumsy and wet. You don't know what's coming, she whispered. Then again, maybe they did. Because when the sun finally rose, truly rose, the air felt different. Heavy. And deep in the trees, something moved. Something that didn't belong. The real threat wasn't the predators she'd feared. It was the people who wore boots, and carried guns, and left shells like breadcrumbs. Rowan stepped back, locked the cabin door, and set a flare gun by her cot. The jungle had rules, and tonight, someone was going to break them. Rowan barely slept. Each time her eyes fluttered closed, her mind played tricks. Gunshots in the wind, boot steps in the leaves, a scream that never quite came. By dawn, she was already dressed, boots laced, rifle cleaned and loaded. The mother leopard still hadn't returned. The cubs whimpered now and then, curling into each other in the corner where she'd placed her warmest blanket. They looked so fragile, so breakable, and yet, their eyes were opening now. And behind those golden pupils was something ancient, something wild. Rowan watched them for a moment, heart tight. Then she opened the cabin door. The world outside was wrong. The trees looked the same. The sky was pale and sleepy. But the air buzzed, like it was holding its breath. And the first thing she noticed, the claw marks. Deep, raw scratches slashed across the side of the outpost, high up near the roofline. Too high for a bear, too wide for a cat. Rowan stared at them, then turned in a slow circle. More marks. Dug into the bark of trees, cut across the muddy trail. Drag lines. Something had been hunted, or dragged. She stepped into the clearing, and stopped cold. Blood. A wide smear across the trail, half-dried, still sticky. It led north, toward the ravine, toward the hunting ground. Rowan's hand hovered over her weapon. Then she followed, step by step. Each pace felt louder than it should have. Even the birds were quiet. Then something shimmered. Metal. Half-buried. She crouched. Camera trap. Military grade. Hidden under brush. Its lens cracked and blinking red. Rowan picked it up. Not government issue. Someone had been filming here. Watching. Tracking. She stood and turned. That's when she saw the symbol. Carved deep into the side of a nearby pine. Just 3 lines joined like a triangle with a circle through the middle. Rowan had seen it before. Poacher's mark. A silent warning. A territory claim. But this wasn't just a warning. It was a message. They knew she was here. A sudden rustle made her spin, rifle raised. Nothing. Just leaves. But the hairs on her neck stayed upright. She stepped back slowly, turned, and froze. A tripwire, barely visible in the mud, stretched across the trail leading back to the cabin. She hadn't triggered it on the way out. which meant it had been placed after she left. And there, nestled just off the path, a small handmade device. A mine. Rowan backed away, heartbeat roaring in her ears. She took the long route back to the cabin, cutting through the brush. Thorns tore her sleeves. Mosquitoes swarmed her face. But her thoughts were louder than the forest. This wasn't random. She was being hunted. The leopards were the excuse. But she was the target now. She reached the clearing just as the sky began to rumble. A storm building on the horizon. The cubs mewed when she stepped inside, then quieted. Rowan bolted the door, locked the windows, then pulled the flare gun from the wall and loaded it. She stared at the cubs for a long time. The mother still hadn't returned. And now night was coming again. With it, hunters. With it, something worse. She moved to the cabinet and pulled out her emergency beacon, the one she hadn't used since the jungle first went dark. She typed in the code, held her breath. Signal sent. Whether anyone would answer was another question. Outside, the sky broke open. Rain poured down like bullets. And in the distance, a howl. Not a dog. Not a leopard. Something in between. Rowan stared at the door. Weapon ready. Heartbeat steady. Tonight she wouldn't run. Tonight she wouldn't hide. Tonight, she'd find out who marked her for death, and why they hadn't pulled the trigger. Yet, the storm didn't knock. It broke the sky open like a shotgun blast. Rain hammered the jungle, turning dirt to mud, blurring every scent, soaking every sound. The trees thrashed. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled the glass on Rowan's outpost windows. She stood by the door, rifle slung across her chest, flare gun in her hand, every muscle pulled tight like a tripwire. The cubs slept curled up in the corner, tiny chests rising and falling with the rhythm of the storm. One of them snored, soft and wheezy. The smallest, the one she'd almost lost. She kept her eyes on the treeline outside. Nothing moved, but her gut knew better. That tripwire hadn't been an accident. Someone had come close, too close, and they didn't leave empty-handed. Rowan turned off the cabin light. Darkness hugged the room. Only the occasional flash of lightning lit her world now. Silver snapshots of the trees, the clearing, the edge of something lurking just out of reach. Then a sound. Soft, delicate, a growl. No, not a growl. A warning. Low and sharp, just under the crack of thunder. She raised her rifle and stepped closer to the window. Lightning struck again, and that's when she saw her. The mother. Soaked, limping, her ribs visible through rain-slicked fur. Eyes locked on Rowan's. No fear, no flinch, but blood stained her back leg. Fresh, dark. She was hurt, and she wasn't alone. From the trees behind her, something slinked forward. A man. Camouflage gear. Rifle slung low. Face smeared with mud. He didn't see Rowan in the shadows. Not yet. But the leopard did. She turned her head slightly, made a low sound, almost a hum, and vanished. Gone into the dark like a ghost. Rowan's breath caught. The man stepped into the clearing. Careful. Slow. Looking around. Then, crack. A twig snapped near the trees behind him. He spun. Gun raised. Another figure stepped out. Then another. Rowan counted 3. No badges. No gear markings. But all armed. They weren't soldiers. They were poachers. And the cabin was their mark. She ducked away from the window and pressed her back against the wall, fingers tight around the flare gun. She had seconds. She crossed the room and gently scooped the cubs into the crate. They stirred, whimpered, but didn't cry out. Good. She slid the crate under the cot. Then she moved back to the window. The men were whispering now, pointing at the cabin. One of them circled around the side. Another approached the door. Her finger hovered on the flare trigger. She could fire, but that would bring more trouble. Noise, tension, and she was alone. Until she wasn't. A scream. Sharp. Panicked. Cut off. Rowan's eyes flew to the treeline. One of the men was gone. The other spun toward the sound. Too late. The mother leopard hit him like thunder. A flash of claws. Teeth. Blood sprayed the wet grass. The third man tried to run. Didn't make it 2 steps before something low and fast lunged from the brush. Another leopard. Smaller. Male. Young. And angry. Rowan stared. Frozen. The jungle exploded. The storm vanished under snarls, roars, the thud of bodies hitting the earth. Then silence. Heavy. Complete. Rowan stood slowly. Stepped outside. Rain soaked her in seconds. The clearing was empty, except for the 3 weapons left behind, and a blood trail leading back into the jungle. She followed it with her eyes. And there, just beyond the trees, 2 yellow eyes, watching, not threatening, just waiting. The mother leopard stepped out. She limped forward, slow, deliberate, stopped just feet away from Rowan. They stared at each other. Then the leopard turned her head, toward the cabin. Quiet nod. Then she vanished, back into the jungle. Rowan exhaled for the first time in minutes. She turned back toward the door, and froze. One of the cubs was out of the crate, sitting at the threshold, looking up at her, waiting. Rowan scooped it gently into her arms, whispered, "Your mom's a badass." Thunder cracked again. This time it sounded like applause. The rain eased at dawn, not stopped, just softened, like the storm had made its point and now watched from the trees. Inside the outpost, Rowan didn't sleep. She sat with her back against the wall, cradling the smallest cub in her lap. The other 2 curled nearby on a pile of torn blankets and gauze. The mother had vanished again, into the same jungle that had nearly swallowed her whole. But this time it felt different, intentional, as if she had somewhere to be, and someone to meet. Rowan stood, stretching the stiffness from her limbs, and grabbed her canteen. The water tasted of iron and moss. She took 3 slow sips and listened to the forest. It was too quiet. Birdsong gone. No chirps. No rustling leaves. Not even the distant echo of monkeys calling to each other. Something was coming. She stepped outside. The air was thick. Not with smoke or rain this time, but with a silence that pulsed. Then, in the distance, a sharp, metallic bark. Gunfire. Far off but not far enough. Her heart kicked into her throat. She rushed back inside, latched the crate with the cubs, and shouldered her medical pack. Just as her hand hit the flare gun, something moved at the treeline. A flash of spotted fur. Blood-matted. Eyes wild. The mother. But she wasn't alone. She limped toward the cabin with something in her jaws. Not prey. Not food. A jacket. Dark green. Torn. Soaked in blood. She dropped it at Rowan's feet. Rowan bent down, heart racing. She recognized it. Military issue. Local patrol unit. The kind worn by soldiers assigned to jungle border zones. She flipped it over. Inside the pocket, a badge. Lieutenant Clay Morano. A man who went missing 6 months ago. Listed Kia. No body found. Rowan's mind spun. Was this the leopard's way of saying something? Warning her? No. It was more than that. It was a trade. She looked up. The mother leopard stood over the jacket, panting. Then she stepped back. Made that same low, rumbling sound from nights before. A call. A message. Rowan didn't move. She waited. The leopard turned and began to walk. Slow. Deliberate. Then stopped. Looked back. Waited. Rowan swallowed. Then followed. They moved through mud and branches, past the shattered tripwire, deeper than Rowan had dared go before. For miles they walked, until finally, they stopped at the edge of a wide gully. Below, barely visible through vines and thorns, was a cage. Metal. Rusted. But solid. Inside it, a man. Alive. Bloodied. Barely conscious. Rowan gasped. Morano. His eyes cracked open. Cloudy. Broken. The leopard snarled. Rowan climbed down fast, slipping once, catching herself on a root. She pried open the cage door with a crowbar she found jammed in the mud. The smell inside was death and rust. She knelt beside him. "Hold on," she whispered. He blinked, tried to speak. Only blood came out. She unpacked her kit with hands she forced not to shake. Stabilized him. Slowed the bleeding. Did everything she could. Above, the mother leopard sat like a statue, unmoving, watching. When Rowan finally had Morano steady enough to move, she heard something else. Voices. Men. Human. Clothes. Laughing. Guns slung over shoulders. Wonder if the big cat came back last night. Bet she's bleeding. Might be easy to finish now. Rowan's heart froze. She hoisted Morano onto her shoulder. Turned to the leopard. Go. Get out of here. The leopard didn't move. Just growled. Deep. Low. Like a warning. Then she vanished. Not to escape. To distract. Gunfire erupted seconds later. Not at Rowan. Not at Morano. But away deeper into the trees. She carried the half-dead soldier up the ravine. Felt like miles. Mud sucked at her boots. Her shoulder screamed. Her vision swam. But she made it. Dragged him into a blind behind the old ranger tower. Radioed a code. Echo Delta 39. Package found. Friendly is alive. Extraction needed. Static. Then, copy that. She dropped the headset. Turned back toward the jungle. The gunfire had stopped. So had the growls. So had everything. Rowan sat beside the soldier and whispered, "You were traded for something sacred." Morano didn't reply. But the leopard? She watched from the edge of the trees. Bleeding. Battered. Unbroken. Then she turned and walked back into the wild. The rescue chopper came at sunrise. Its blades cut the morning sky like a warning siren, loud and righteous. Wind blasted through the canopy, sending leaves and birds scattering. Paramedics leapt from the cabin the moment skids kissed dirt. They found Rowan slumped beside Lieutenant Morano, both covered in blood, ash, and sweat. Her hands were still pressed to his wounds, her eyes locked on the treeline. He was alive, because of her, because of a leopard. They lifted him first, then her. She refused the stretcher. "I'm not broken," she said quietly. But the truth was she was, not in body, but in spirit. Something about the jungle had gotten under her skin and stayed there. Something ancient, something primal, something that watched with gold-flecked eyes and never forgot a debt. At the ranger outpost, the medics cleaned her wounds and ran tests. The cubs were safe, tucked in her quarters, wrapped in soft blankets, each one blinking, eating, surviving. The tiniest cub, the one she'd brought back to life with battlefield tools and prayers, mewed from under her bedroll. She stroked its back. "Little fighter," she whispered. There were questions, endless ones. Military investigators, wildlife authorities, park officials. Who had trapped Morano? Why was there a cage in a ravine? What happened to the poachers? Rowan gave them answers, but not all of them. She didn't say what really happened that night. Didn't describe the way the jungle had gone silent, how the shadows had circled, how the air grew still right before the hunters disappeared into their own screams. She didn't explain how tracks of blood had led away from the bodies. Large tracks, spotted ones. Instead, she gave them data, coordinates, the usual, what they wanted to hear, not what they needed to understand. A week later, after cleanup, they tried to relocate the leopard cubs. She refused. "These ones stay," she told the commanding officer. He argued. She stood her ground. "These cubs are protected." He looked into her eyes and saw something different now, so he backed off. Rowan stayed behind after the teams left. She rebuilt the outpost, strengthened the fences, cleaned the blood, reinforced the doors, and every evening, just before dusk, she sat on the steps with a thermos of tea and waited, not for people, for her, the mother. And one evening she came, not rushing, not growling, just walking from the trees, slow and steady. Her flank bore a new scar, but her eyes were the same. Rowan stood. The leopard stopped 5 feet away. The cubs mewed from inside. The leopard looked toward the sound, then back at Rowan. No one moved. No camera could ever capture what passed between them. It wasn't just gratitude. It was recognition. One mother to another. One protector to another. The jungle had chosen, and it remembered. Rowan reached into her vest pocket and pulled out something small. a single syringe. Inside, medicine for the cub's growing fever. She held it up. The leopard stared. Then, in a moment that defied logic, she said, "Let Rowan approach. Let her touch her again. Let her help." Because once, when the leopard was bleeding, dying, lost, Rowan helped. Now they were even. Or maybe not. Maybe no one ever owed. Maybe this was just how things worked in the wild, when fear didn't rule and kindness still meant something. That night, when the leopard disappeared back into the trees and the cubs slept soundly in their blankets, Rowan lay on the floor beside them, eyes open, breathing deep, knowing the jungle wasn't done with her. But if it ever came for her again, she wouldn't face it alone. Not anymore. Thank you to my amazing family for staying with me until the end of this story. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this journey, I just know you'll love what comes next. I've prepared something even more exciting and surprising that I can't wait to share with you. Just click on the end card appearing on your screen right now to watch the next one.